Welcome back, and thanks for joining us at this morning's session. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional indigenous lands that we all live and work on today. Although we're gathered virtually again this year, we recognize the importance of the traditional indigenous territories that we enjoy the pleasure of living and working within. As such, I urge you to visit the Native Land digital website and search for the territory that you are located on. That website, if you can't remember it from yesterday, is www.native-land.ca. www.native-land.ca. I would like to thank our sponsors for this particular session, UBCP ACTRA, who is also our conference's platinum sponsor. I neglected to mention them in my opening a couple of minutes back, as well as Levitt Machinery, who's always been a longtime supporter of Actsafe and everything we do here. So thank you both for sponsoring this session. We want this conversation about firearm safety in BC to be a productive, frank, and honest one. So we are willing to answer some questions. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function in the chat window. If you look at the chat window, you'll see chat participants, Q&A, the third tab over, click on that. Type in your question. You have the ability to upvote or downvote a question if you like. If you want to really hear the answer to a particular question, upvote it, and we will pass it along to our panel. I'll keep an eye on that. Make sure that we do get to the questions in an appropriate manner. And with that, let's talk about firearm safety. So, on Thursday, October 21st, 2021, during a rehearsal for the independent film Rust, a firearm was discharged with a projectile striking director of photography Helena Hutchins and director Joel Souza. Mr. Souza was transported to a local hospital for treatment, while Ms. Hutchins was airlifted to the University of Mexico Hospital, where she was pronounced dead upon arrival. This fatality sent shockwaves for the motion picture production community worldwide. We at Actsafe, along with our panelists, have received a lot of questions from the media, from workers in the industry, and from employers out of this province asking whether or not this type of incident could happen here. The people we've assembled on this panel to answer that question are truly the best of the best. Well-respected, knowledgeable, seasoned veterans that know what it takes to use firearms safely on set. And they'll share what it takes to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen here. On our panel today is Props Master Dean Goodine, Armorer Tom Felcan from Felcan Enterprises, and First Assistant Director Brian Knight. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here, and welcome to the stage. Before we dig into this, I'm going to go around the room and ask each one of you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Dean, let's start with you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. As Anad said, that I'm a industry veteran. I've been a prop master for 37 years. I worked on films such as Unforgiven, Inception, Legends of the Fall, Open Range, and Passchendaele. In my career, I probably department headed or overseen over 2 million blank rounds through firearms without one incident on set.
Thanks, Dean. Tom?
Yeah, my name's Tom Felcan. I've been a motion picture armorer since 1985 here in BC. I'm owner of Felcan Enterprises, a supplier of equipment to the film industry. And I developed and wrote the motion picture firearms safety advisory that's now being used by Actsafe.
And thank you for that, Tom. Welcome to the panel. And last but not least, certainly not least, Brian Knight. Well, who are you? Why are you here?
My name is Brian Knight. I'm a first assistant director. I've been in the film industry since 1986. I've been a first AD since 1996. I've worked all over the world: South Africa, Croatia, Romania, France, Germany, and the United States, and of course in Canada. And yeah, I'm first AD, kind of the manager on the set.
Perfect. So we'll get into the roles that each one of you play in the course of a production when it comes to firearms safety. And this is a pretty heavy topic, right? It plays on the minds of a lot of people. Your three positions, first assistant director, props master, and an armorer, those positions themselves are directly involved with this particular incident. Now, being representatives or workers within those departments, how did this incident affect you? And I'm not really delving too much into the business side of things. We can talk about that, but as far as a mental health side of things, like what impact did this incident have on you? I'm going to throw this one over to Tom to start the conversation off.
Well, I think that when we first heard about this, it was almost a little bit of panic, I think, everywhere. I was receiving phone calls from across the United States. I got phone calls from Europe, Australia, basically everywhere. And of course, everybody was speculating as to what happened, how it could have happened. Since then, we still don't know the answers completely because it is still under investigation and it's going before the courts. So I think that, our discussion here today is going to be about not necessarily what happened there, because none of us can really speculate on that. But it's in the situation of what did happen is how we could make sure that it doesn't happen anywhere. And there's a lot of concern. Productions all over the world right now are somewhat reluctant to use any sort of firearms on film sets. So hopefully today's discussion will, help put everybody's mind at ease a little bit and kind of figure out, how to continue from here on.
Brian, how did this affect you?
Well, as the safety officer on set, it was shocking. My first thought was, how could this happen? Because it's almost impossible to happen. It's just, it was unfathomable that something like this could even happen, because it's just so rare. And we have such good safeguards and safety procedures. It was more shocking than anything else on a personal level. Just how could it happen?
Yeah, I think same thing was going through my mind as well, as like how is all I kept on saying. Dean, what about how do you feel?
It was a gut punch. I can't describe it any other way. I was stunned by it. I think when Brandon Lee was killed in 1993, there were already great safeguards in place prior to that, but we really upped our game. There are at least 5 steps to get a firearm safely into an actor's hands, and any part of that 5-step process would have prevented it. So I was just completely shocked, and I hope that we can help answer some of those questions today, not about what happened there, but about what we do here to keep everybody safe.
You mentioned these safeguards and the 5 steps. How common is something like this involving firearms, a fatality involving firearms in the motion picture industry? Does anybody want to take that one? Mr. Falcon?
I pointed down to Tom.
Well, I mean, in my career, as far as I know, and after this happened in New Mexico, I talked to a lot of people, a lot of seasoned veterans, both in here, and from what we could gather from the information we could find, this appears to be possibly only the 3rd incident that anybody's known about. First of all, in the mid-'80s with John Hexum, the actor in Los Angeles, the second being Brandon Lee, and then this. So are there others? I personally haven't been able to find any other information that I'm aware of. And if it is the case that these are only the 3 going back 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it is extremely rare. And it was a shock that it even after what happened with Brandon Lee, that something similar could ever happen again.
Right. So Brandon Lee, John Eric Hexum, and Alina Hutchins all were killed using a blank firing firearm. I think that's probably the best way to term the weapon that was used in these 3 instances, wouldn't you say? As opposed to a replica?
Yeah, well, exactly. So John Hexum, he put a loaded a handgun that had a blank in it up to his temple and pulled the trigger. And that resulted in a massive skull fracture, and he died of the injury. With Brandon Lee, there was probably not as much experience from the people that were handling firearms on set, and they had made some sort of a improvised dummy round that they needed. The bullet became dislodged in the barrel. A blank was then later put into it. The gun wasn't checked properly. And then when the blank was fired, it pushed the bullet out and struck Brandon Lee, and he died of that injury. And in this case, it appears that live ammunition was brought to the film set, got mixed in somehow, and ended up in the gun and ended up being discharged. Yeah, so
why do we have to have a blank firing weapon on set? Why can't we just use a replica?
well, I think that was a good question for Dean. He's had probably a lot of experience with picking out and talking to directors and writers and producers and scripts, and it's his job to pick out something that is best suited for that particular script, scene, or action.
Well, the reality of replicas and rubber guns and whatnot is that there are not a lot available that will match, say you're doing a historical film like I did with Passchendaele or Legends of the Fall, where you need Enfields and Mausers and MG08s and the various battle weapons, or Turkish Mausers and Ararat. So those weapons are not readily available. The other thing that I can speak to is how actors handle weapons, for lack of a better term. You put an inanimate object in their hands and get them to act with it, no matter how much you try to show them, it never goes that well. So what we do in Canada, when I sit with Tom and I sit with Brian and prep, we go over everything. We train our actors. Our actors are trained in how to handle these to look like the role they're portraying. So to go to all replicas, and I'm not saying don't use replicas, and I'm not saying don't use rubbers. We do that now. We do that in a lot of cases. We do a lot of CGI muzzle flash when safety puts us in that situation, because safety is the number one thing. That's why we're on this panel. That's why we have a long career doing what we're doing. That's why we've had no accidents in British Columbia that are under any of our watches. So I think it's, to throw it all away is not going to work.
Right. Brian, do you have anything from your point of view as to why do we need blank firing weapons?
Well, I think Dean touched on it. It's a situational thing. Sometimes it's actors are very tactile. They like to move things around. So it's the weight of the gun, even the weight of a gun with a blank in it is different, and the bang that it makes, that it's, and the recoil and the hammer coming back, everything just it's all very it helps them with performance. And sometimes they have to do, they're actors and they can do a lot of things. It just helps them a little bit. And what Dean also touched on was it's very situational. So we use, I've said multiple times, this is a close hallway. We can't do a blank firing weapon because the brass is going to fly, or it's too close. We can't do it safely. So we say, okay, it's CGI for this particular shot. It's all depending on the scene, depending on what the shot is about. And sometimes we make the call. Sometimes we plan for something, and then it's unforeseen. We say, and I've said, we're going to do CG on this one. It's too close and it's not safe. And I've never had a producer balk at it yet, ever.
An interesting question just popped into my brain. Is what role does the performer play in this? Like, do you have performers, or have you ever had a performer that says, I don't want to use a fake gun? Brian?
Yeah, Brian and I have firsthand experience. Brian and I did one of the heavier action shows I've ever done, where we fired probably over 100,000 rounds in a 5-day sequence on a show. And every actor on this long-running show refused to carry a replica because they felt like it was an insult to their character's military background. So what that show did, and I'm going to throw it out to Grace Gilroy, our line producer on that show, was she then agreed that we could hire a full-time armorer all the time, because the thing is, some of the weapons the actors chose to carry, I'm not licensed to handle. I'm licensed up to a point, but then when you get into the prohibited weapons, which are full auto, and that's a whole special deal, and that's where you have to step into the armor world even more so. Prop people, and Tom put it best, prop people are gun handlers, but we're not armors. Some of us can do it, but we're not armors. And sometimes a young prop person gets pressured by an inexperienced production manager or producer to say, well, you have a license, you can be the armor. Why are we going to spend this money to bring an armorer in? And so going to that question about the actors, yes, a lot of actors on that show in particular, we had to have real firearms. We tried to give them metal replicas. We tried to talk them into it. There was no way they wouldn't budge.
All right. You mentioned something else, Brian. Oh, sorry, Dean. Actually, I think mentioned this about ammunition being brought to set, and I want to not necessarily dwell on the ammunition side of things, but I'm curious, and maybe is more of an education piece for the members of the audience. What is the process that one takes in bringing a firearm to set, whether it's a replica or a real live firearm?
Well, I'll put myself in the situation. I did a movie called Open Range with Kevin Costner, and we had a 12-day shootout that we shot for 12 days straight. And so I had an armor there, but all of us took part in it because the only props working were the firearms. So what happens, every prop person will open that vault, or armor, if they're on set that day, will open that vault. And the first thing they do when they pull whatever weapon is going to be used is you immediately check it. Flashlight down the barrel, you make sure that it's empty, it's completely clear and safe. Then when you take it to set, the first person I look for is Brian, the first AD. I walk up to Brian and I go, Brian, I want to show you that this weapon is safe. I pull out a flashlight. If it's an open barrel, like a Western revolver, I have a little T-rod I run down the barrel as well. And I show Brian that it's safe. Then Brian and I walk over to the camera department and the people who are going to be in proximity, even before the actor is there, we will show that it is safe. When the actor arrives, we will again show that the weapon is safe. Those are at least five steps. I remember I said on an interview on Q, I said to Tom Power, when I showed Brad Pitt his revolver on Jesse James, I clicked it off 24 times to all the people who had to see that those dummies would never fire in that cylinder, because a Western revolver has to have a bullet in the chamber of the cylinder. So I would click it off at least 24 times before I put it in an actor's hands. You can't check a firearm enough to know that it's safe. And Tom can pick up with that one, with how everybody should think about a firearm on set. And you know where I'm leading you, Tom.
Yeah, everybody's question is going to be now dummy rounds, because down at Rust they were using dummy rounds, so there's a lot of conversation about dummy rounds. Dummy rounds are manufactured, they're completely inert. It's a casing, a bullet, a dummy primer, completely inert, and ball bearing is inside the cartridge case, so that anybody picking up a dummy round, the first thing you do is you rattle it, and they call it rattlers, rattle rounds, and that's how you identify it. So you open up your box of dummy rounds that you now have to put into, let's say, a revolver, because the camera is seeing from the front of the gun, maybe a close-up. And so you can actually show the individual that's going to be handling the gun, look, I'm going to be putting dummy rounds in your gun, and here they are. There's 6 of them, and you pick each. You can rattle it. It makes a jingling sound. And that way you know that it is completely inert and it's been specifically manufactured for use in the movie industry. And then you can chamber them. And a lot of the dummy rounds also, not only do they have a ball bearing inside, some of them, the entire back of the cartridge case isn't even there. It's machined out. A lot of checks and balances for using dummy rounds. And if you happen to pick one up that looks real and you shake it and nothing happens, well, then you would never use it, because it's obviously there's something wrong with it. Now, the guns themselves, the vast majority of these guns are so heavily internally modified because they have to be tuned to fire, which requires all sorts of, it can be anywhere from a few hours to 20, 30 hours to do the modifications to make one of these firearms function safely and reliably. And them have got internal modifications and a blank firing adapter that's actually screwed into the bore inside that in most cases prevent anything from ever coming out of those guns to begin with. So yeah, there's a lot of checks and balances in place for any of the types of guns, whether Dean using a single action Army revolver and a lever action Winchester, to some of these shows that Brian's been on where they're using all sorts of semi-automatic, automatic type firearms.
Ooh. So a lot goes into safely producing a show with firearms is what I'm hearing. How does that relate to general practices? And I know, Tom, you mentioned that all three of you have worked around the world. How do we rate in Canada or in BC when it comes to safety practices using firearms? And is anything?
I think I'll leave that one up to you.
I'll start. I've done I've done Vietnam movies and World War II movies and some period films all over the world, and Canada is way up there, one of the tops. I worked in the United States. I didn't have a lot of guns on the show I did in the States, but Canada is top notch, and we have some of the best armorers that I've ever worked with in town here. And I think the second place is actually Croatia. We had a really good armorer there, and he was so safe and very militant about his safety. It was refreshing because we had a lot of guns. It was a World War II movie, and we had a lot of weapons. We even had tanks and things like that. So it was just everything was really decommissioned Russian tanks, and so I was nervous. About it, but he did great, and I think but my standards were very high from Canada.
Right. Dean, Tom, do you want to add anything about your experience?
I mean, I'll make a little comment. Many years ago, when I started to develop the motion picture firearm safety advisory, the book, I interviewed and talked with armorers and props people from everywhere: the United States, Europe, Australia, South Africa, and it was a combined effort with feedback from all over the world on how guns are used on film sets and the stories we get back from everybody. And so yeah, that what we've got here in BC, as far as like the standards that we have to adhere to, that we have, I think are probably some of the best anywhere internationally. I don't think they get much better.
I think, and to add to that, I think information is key to all of that. I was helping a prop master on an action film when the Rush tragedy happened, and we had a big firing sequence coming up in the movie, and the studio, rightfully so, like everybody around the world, freaked out. But they set up a 1-hour meeting with our movie's armor and our movie's prop master, and our armorer just did a whole presentation of everything that I know from coming to Vancouver to work from Alberta when I used to work there, was that when I walk onto a set in British Columbia and I look over and I see one of the armorers from British Columbia on that set, as a prop master, my first reaction is to breathe easy, because I know I can take care of the 100 other things that I have to do as a prop master, while I know that the firearm is under the watchful eye of that armorer. And I worked with American prop masters on firearm shows before I came to BC, and the early days of my career, and they were all very safe and very good. but there was not, the level here is top, the very top.
Right. There's one question in the Q&A that just popped up that that is kind of related to the dummy rounds conversation we just had, and I just want to jump back to that. Are snap caps civilian dummy rounds unpainted like a Magpul or Type Tipton acceptable to use in place of dummy rounds with the internal ball bearing? Mr. Falcon, I think this is
well, dummy rounds, actual visual dummy rounds, are used only for exactly that, visual. So if you need to see a sequence where a gun is being loaded, or if you're seeing it, close up from, a particular angle, well, then the dummy round itself is also the prop, real. So that's what dummy rounds are primarily used for. It's for any time that you need a real looking bullet being either loaded into a magazine or loaded into a revolver or a shotgun or whatever it may be. That's what the dummy rounds are for. Anything else, you don't need it. So something like maybe a snap cap or could be used, for instance, in a semi-automatic firearm, where after firing the blanks, the action of the firearm has to close, because most firearms are designed that when they run out of ammunition, the action remains open. And so your last round going in could be an actual factory manufactured, cycling type dummy or a snap cap type dummy. But yeah, as far as the actual realistic looking dummy rounds, they're a prop, just like the gun or the holster or anything else. It has to look real. So for that instance, dressing into a belt, putting it into opening a ball, spill that onto the table, that's where the ball bearing dummy rounds would be used.
Right. All right. Thank you for that, and I hope that answers your question in the Q&A. And thank you for your question. So we're getting back before we get to the other question in the Q&A. Getting back to the other conversation about safety differences between Canada and abroad. What do the regulations have to? How do the regulations play into that? Canada is a much more regulated country when it comes to firearms use. Tom?
Yeah, so here in Canada, obviously, we have very strict firearms laws. And when firearms are being used on any set anywhere in Canada, they require federal licensing. So these are federal licenses issued by the province. And the one thing that we have here in Canada that may not be in other film centers around the world is a specific clause. There's a number of terms and conditions for the use of firearms on film sets that are federal. And I'll just quickly read one of these clauses. So federally, in all of Canada, if you are to use a firearm on a film set, states, and I'll read this directly from it, ammunition. There must be no live ammunition in a transport vehicle, on the production set, or in the possession of an employee in relation to motion picture, television, video, or theatrical productions. So that right there, we cannot bring live ammunition to a set in any capacity, and that is federally regulated by Canada.
And are you able to speak to the difference between in that particular regulation between Canada and the United States?
Well, that regulation, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist in the United States. Right. Because the licensing is completely different. Both the two countries have different licenses, different laws, and different regulations on what you can, what you cannot possess, where you can possess it, if you can, carry a firearm or not carry a firearm. The two countries are completely different.
Right. So this might be more of a question for Brian, having been the AD on set, and I know you might not have ever come across this situation, but have you ever come across anybody in the United States in your career while working that ended up bringing a firearm to set, their own personal firearm?
No.
No.
I'm going to say no.
Fair enough.
I had an actor actually bring a weapon to set once, and we had to take it away from him. Not in Canada.
Right.
It was abroad, and this actor had a gun. He was showing it around, and I took the guns away from him.
And how did that?
I personally did.
How did that go over?
He wasn't happy. He wasn't very happy, but we locked him up and gave him to him at the end of the show. I did want to say one thing though, to touch on what Dean talked about, his 5 or 6 steps to getting the gun to set. And since I've been doing this as a first AD, I've never, ever handed a weapon to an actor, ever. I've never, ever done it. I've been there all the time when they're handed to it. Now I've been handed weapons back after we've cut, and they've given me the weapon, and I've taken it and found the armor or the props person right away to be because they just, sometimes when the actors just stop, they just they're done, and they hand the weapon over to me because I'm the first person that they usually see. But I've never ever handed a weapon to an actor ever, and I won't. It's not my job, and I just it's about chain of command, chain of evidence, or not to say it's evidence, but you know, it's we want to know where this weapon is, and if it skips a step, then if the weapon went from, if we checked it out, Dean and I checked out the weapon, and then it went somewhere and we don't know where it went to, we're checking the weapon again because we don't know what happened to it. Right. So before we hand it off to the actor, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, I think Brian is correct in that the chain of that weapon's journey to an actor's hand is really only 2 people. It's the armor or the prop master to the actor's hand, back to the armor or the prop master. No AD, no director, nobody else on that production, if you're in any capacity, is allowed to touch that weapon. And it's just something that everybody, it's not like it's a surprise. I think the thing that we haven't really touched on yet, and maybe that was a further question, is that we have pre-production and we know all our firing sequences in the show. So Brian and I will meet with the director and the producer, and we will talk about the firing sequences, and we will plan out how we're going to do it. And sometimes, like Brian said, we can plan, and then on the day we have to quickly improvise because we have an unsafe situation where we can fire a blank, and so we switch to CGI. But the key to having a safe set always is information. It starts in prep. It starts with the morning safety meeting. And when I get my chance to do my talk, I always say that I have final say. Ultimately, the Brian really is the final say, but I also have a final say as to whether you're going to pull that trigger or not. If I see something going sideways, I'm going to step in and say cut before the director or the first AD may react, because that's my responsibility, just like it's the armor's responsibility when they are charged with that firing weapon. So again, it's about being completely dialed in and paying attention the entire time that is out on the set. That weapon is out on the set.
Right. So I guess this is a good place to insert Krista's question from the Q&A, and that is, what is the process for reporting unsafe firearms handling on set? Is there, I mean, obviously there is a process, but what is it? Tom?
The safe handling?
Reporting unsafe. So somebody's fooling around with a gun.
Well, I'll take it.
Oh, yeah.
I'll take this. Go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead, Brian. I mean, you've probably been handed that question before.
It's in my safety meeting. I always tell everybody I have a safety meeting at the top of the day, and then whenever we have a situation where we have a big special effect or a stunt, I have another safety meeting before that. But at the beginning of the day, I mention that if there's anything that's unsafe, I tell people not to walk by anything, and just kind of, if you don't mention it, then it's going to be unsafe for somebody. Somebody's going to get hurt. So if you see something, just mention it. Mention it to me. if you think that I'm not, if I'm the person that's maybe not being safe, then you talk to the producer. You talk to, there's always a hotline on the call sheet, usually on big studio shows. I know Warner Brothers has one and Netflix has one. There's an anonymous hotline, and you can call and just say, hey, you know, just about this. But first things first, immediately, I would just come to the first AD and just say, hey, I just think that this is not safe. Right down to even this cable that's running across the ground, I think can be taped down or whatever. So just always mention the safety right away, because it's just, if you wait, somebody's going to get hurt, and that's unacceptable.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
thing with mistake handling.
yeah, I think Brian's got it exactly right. I mean, if you're on a film set, if you're new to the industry or you're just unsure, I mean, we have a zero tolerance for horseplay of any kind, regardless if you're, you know, handed a rubber gun or for a blocking or, you know, anything. There's zero tolerance. And to report anything that you consider unsafe, whether the way that the prop person is handling something. And it could be a firearm, it could be a knife, it could be an axe, a chainsaw, it could be anything. Or maybe the armor, you know, somebody says, hey, you know, we've got this armor here and, you know, I'm not real comfortable. I just seen something that I don't really agree with. Yeah, absolutely. You speak up. You go see the first AD. That would be your first line. And if you're having issues there, then there are the hotlines on most call sheets to phone and voice your concern. Absolutely.
Right. Nice. Thank you very much for that answer. Krista, I hope that's good. A couple of other things that are in the chat, and I'm just looking down the list here. Thank you very much, everybody, for filling the Q&A section with questions. We talked a little bit about planning, and I know there's a question from Sarah about planning in there, and I'm going to get to in a little while, because we do have a little bit of a chat on that coming up. So the safety maintained in open carry states, I'm not too sure if that is anything within our purview that we can answer, but maybe Tom, I don't know if you want to, the question is, how is safety maintained in open carry states? I'm not sure if we're necessarily experts in that field here. So, but I will turn it over to you to see if you have any.
Yeah, so again, I mean, I can only speak for Canada because that's where we work and that's where our industry is. So I can't really speak for open carry states. And that's really all I can say.
And then just to quickly, thank you. And that's pretty well what I thought. It's kind of outside of the scope of our conversation or our knowledge right now in this thing. Did all three gun-related fatalities occur in the United States? Yes, they did, as far as I know. Yeah. And the question that we can get down to the planning side of things, and you mentioned the pre-production and the planning side of things, and you there's also a conversation that a lot of times I would assume at that point, Dean and Brian, that this is when we need to bring an armorer onto set. How much pushback do you get from producers and production managers in hiring that person? Because I know I back in my production days, and I would ask production managers, hey, as an ALM, I need another PA working down here to watch the trucks. It's kind of required. It says, well, no, we can't afford that, and you have to make do with what you got. And that's for at the time it was $100 or $200 a day position. How do you justify, or how do you have that conversation with a producer or production manager?
Well, I have to do a little history first quickly, and it's back to the pre-Brandon Lee period of prop mastering to the post-Brandon Lee period. And we're now, for the new generation of prop masters, are going to have the pre-Helena Hutchins prop masters and the post-Helena Hutchins prop masters. And what I mean by that was pre-1993, when I would sit down with a production manager, and I had about 7 years experience at that point in time, like a lot of new prop masters in British Columbia, I would say, I want to bring in an armor. And I would usually get the look like, well, you have a license, you can do it. And I didn't have the experience to push back as hard as I felt, because, and I'd always say, well, I'm doing a food scene and the next scene is this action scene, and I really want someone just to take care of the firearm. So I got a little bit of pushback then. But once Brandon Lee was tragically killed, the good that came out of it was everybody recognized the power of a firearm mishandled on a set. And as we proceeded after that, I never really got any pushback, because if I did, I'd usually say, well, how many years have you done props? And the production manager or producer would look at me like, what are you asking me? And it's like, that's why you hire me. My job is to tell you how to make something safe happen. And so I suspect now moving forward, productions, when they see they've written in a big action sequence and they do want to use blank firing weapons, are also the studio safety people. I think that argument is valid, that we should bring in armors. When I came to Vancouver in 2003 to do Walking Tall, it was the first time that I didn't have to armor my own show, where I took over a sequence. Once I started working with the Vancouver Armors, I was like, these guys are way better at this than I am. I'm just going to concentrate on the 200 props I need today and let them do the firearms. I don't know if I answered your question, but I will say that
it doesn't come up that often anymore.
It doesn't come up that often for me anymore. Matter of fact, it hasn't come up for me. It's just an automatic. If I say I need an armor, I get an armor. If I need 4 armors,
I agree with that. The producers and production managers are getting more experienced as well. The ones that are experienced, they just understand that's a no-brainer.
Right. Has there ever been a situation where either one of you had to walk away and say, no, you know what, the red flags are starting to go off and anything like that?
I've walked away in a set, not with firearms, but with a stunt where the director, I said, I'm not doing this scene. And the director, I just said, we're not doing this scene. And the director said, we're doing it anyway. And luckily, the stunt coordinator and a lot of people, they were all from the States, came to back me up. And we didn't actually do it until we reorganized the set. So if you stand up for yourself, and sometimes it's hard, and even as a first AD, it's hard to stand up for yourself. You just got to do it.
Yeah.
You know,
I've had to step in and stop a shot in the middle of a sequence. And I don't know why, but these things always happen when you're in meal penalty, which actually upsets everybody even more. But I said, we have to change to, at the time we were using what are called electric guns, because tight, close shooting sequence. And I had to step in and for about 1 minute, the director was really angry. Then we got the shot and he thanked me for keeping everybody safe, because he said he got caught up in the adrenaline of the moment. And that's the other thing, when firearms are out, you have to remain calm, and you have to be like, you almost have to go into a Zen-like mindset of whatever's going on. You have to maintain the same level of calmness so that you have the ability to step in a reasonable manner and make a change without
right. Nice. Thank you for that, for your answers and being candid with that. Getting back to, I get more of the planning class side of things and the discussions that happen, and there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that might be answered by this next one. Can you take us, maybe all three of you, and I don't know which one to chime in first with this one, but what situations, or what is done in the planning sessions to prepare for the PPE side of things, and specifically in the chat here is a barrier or a shield between camera and the action and those types of things. Like when is that decision made? Is that decision made early in production, that type of thing? Or is it just something that's always carried on the props truck, and whenever you need it, it's pulled out?
Well, I'll start, but I know Tom and Brian can weigh in on this. First of all, the prop department, we supply all the hearing protection, face shields for the camera crew and any crew that are going to be in proximity of the firing zone. The grip department carry Lexan to protect the camera crew and the cameras. And so it's all known. We know that sequence is coming up, so we always have our safety gear ready. The grips are standing by with their Lexan. But what happens at that point in time, it comes under the auspice of the armor and the first AD, if they're in charge of the firing sequence as to who needs to actually be on the set, because it's not a time for looky-loos hanging out because they want to see an action sequence. If you don't need to be there, if you're not physically doing something for that scene, you're asked to leave. And I'm going to stop talking and maybe let Brian pick up from there.
Yeah, I think we talk about it in prep always. So whenever we have any kind of gunfire, it's always props, as Dean said, has the ear protection and eye protection, just mainly for not just stop, just for any kind of residual things coming up. We talk to the grips, and I've built bunkers and I've built huge Lexan, but we've also never ever had a weapon fired directly at a person, even with all the Lexan. We always shoot off of the angle of the person. It's just something that we've always done, and I don't know where I learned it, probably from an armorer, but just to always, even with Lexan and anything we've built, we've always had the weapon is always off angle of any person or even the camera, because and usually it's just an added protection of safety and things like that. Tom?
Yeah, so just going back a little ways, for the people that might not know, Lexan is a trade name for polycarbonate. And it is used in things like bulletproof glass. It's a highly puncture resistant, looks like plexiglass. It's just a clear shield. And, we use them for different angles, protection of different people, primarily for things like, if you are firing blank guns, you've got ejecting casings that are bouncing around. They may bounce off of a ceiling or a pillar, go flying in a particular direction. And like Brian was saying, the never actually pointing at somebody, at least here, in BC, years ago when I was developing the safety program, what we call it is the one safety rule. And so that basically means if you are firing towards either a person or an animal or anything along that lines, the point of aim is at least 1 meter from the person in any direction, left, right, up, and down, because there's really very rarely would there ever be a need to actually fire a blank at of an individual. And if there was a need where, let's say that it was a creative film angle where you would have somebody aiming down a rifle or something towards, the actor on the other end, and the camera was, maybe mounted on the rifle or directly over a shoulder. Well, at that point, already in pre-production, when we would be discussing how we would do that, that would not be an actual gunshot of any kind. That would be a non-firing replica gun of some sort, and it would be done in post and vis effects. So yeah, I know in the old days, and I'm talking way back, it was a little bit different as to how they looked at it. But the 1 meter rule here, we over 20 years now, I think, and that's it. 1 meter off in any direction. There's no reason to actually point it at somebody.
Right. Nice. I think everybody's kind of enlightened us for that question. Still with the planning side of things, and I think Emma's question about scheduling firearms, heavy scenes in a separate stream, and I think that's kind of already done to a certain extent with second units, depending on battle scenes and things. Would that be the correct, I guess, response to this particular question? Separate the pressures of the day-to-day production, separate the pressures of completing the scene from the day-to-day production time constraints. That's what generally is done, right? Second unit, additional photography.
Yeah. I just think it starts with the scheduling of don't schedule too much onto the day, and then you don't have to be rushed to do it. And if you get experienced crew, director and first AD, props and everything else, and camera, then you can make your day and not have to I feel that if you don't, at the end of the day, I'm going home safe, and I'm taking everybody with me. We're all going home safe. So if we don't make the day that day, because we had to take a little extra time to make it safe, then that's what it is, and I'll suffer the consequences. And I've never, I mean, producers get upset, but they're never ever going to say. In the end, I think if you move along and you schedule enough time to do certain sequences, then you're going to make the day, and with plenty of time.
Right.
So I think that's the real answer. I think you just plan for giving the time to do the sequence, the stunt sequence or the special effects sequence. And if you don't, then you need to ask for more time. And it's easy to the way you do scheduling is you give more time to this sequence, and then you just say to the director, on this dialogue sequence of the two people at the cafe, you're going to have to do it really quickly because we're going to need the time over here. So,
and I think that in looking at that question a little closer and moving off to second unit on big action sequences, depending on how they're split up. At the end of the day, you're still doing the same thing. You're still pulling a firearm out of your vault. You're still doing all the proper checks with everybody, and you're placing it into somebody's hands to fire in a scene, whether it's main unit or second unit. It doesn't change anything. And so that's
that. Great. So a lot of things go into planning before the cameras even start rolling, or before the ammunition and the firearms are even brought to set. What about me? I'm an actor, just starting on this big production. What kind of training am I put through before I go to set to use a firearm? Tom, I know you're the one that delivers the Actsafe course. Do I have to take it?
Yeah. So again, in the early stages, when we're first, planning and we're going through scripts and we're discussing, what the show is going to be like, and then we find out who the actors are. So the next thing to do is the actual the training. And the training we always ask for, regardless of what production that we're going to be working on, is we would like some time. That could be anywhere from a few hours to days, or sometimes even weeks. And that involves a whole bunch of different aspects of what we're going to do. We run through all the different safety. We also then, if the actor has to look like he has to be, a particular in his character, if he has to be very proficient in a firearm, then we have to make him look like that. So we'll do everything from, the type of firearm they're going to be using, its characteristics are, how to hold it properly, where the ejecting casings may be going. If you're in a scene where you've got, special effects going off, there's squibs, there's mortars, he's going to be running through, a group of people where there's going to be people crossing his path. So he's going to be firing this gun, and then all of a sudden, at some point, he may have, 2 or 3 people cross his line of fire. What do you do at that point? So we try as much as we possibly can, as much training as we can with the different actors. So and things again like safety. So for instance, during the training, one of the first things that we'll do is show the actor what the procedure is going to be when we hand the actor a firearm. And that could be anything. It could be a BB gun, it could be a handgun, or it could be a rifle or a shotgun. So we'll walk through, on the day when we're going to do this is how it's going to start off. We are going to come up to you and we are going to show you the gun. And if the gun is for any kind of non-firing, then we will show them that it is clear and safe. We will show that to everybody. We will also then announce it. If the gun is to be then loaded, the same procedure. We will come in, we will let everybody know that there's going to be gunfire, whatever particular load it's going to be, whether it's a full load or a quarter load or whatever. We will then show the number of rounds that are going into the gun. We will then make the gun hot, which is it's loaded and it's chambered and ready to fire. We will then hand it to the actor. We will then tell them, okay, your gun's hot. You've got, however many 10 rounds that you're going to fire, and announce it to everybody that the gun is hot, and then we will step away. It's over, and we go through with the scene. Then when we're finished, we will then come up to the actor. We will then ask him to, and again, in training ahead of time, he'll have already be instructed that when they yell cut, the first person in before everybody else is going to be that armor or that gun handler that will then take that firearm away and safely clear it to make sure that there's nothing left in it. That will then be, and then that firearm with the armor or the gun handler will walk away, and then everything else that happens on that set around that will then happen.
So,
I think Dean, if you want to, anything else you can think of for your perspective as the props person standing on the sideline?
No, I think you nailed it. I think the one note in here is that, it's always tough to schedule actors and prep. It depends on the amount of time that you get them in. So I'm always with Brian or his or her second AD, whoever the first AD is, to try and get my time in for the armor to work with them. And there are times when we take them off on the set and take them away from the main crew and cast. We always call out if we're going to fire a blank in training if we're on a set. And the only other note that in that great description from Tom was that when the director says cut and the armor or weapons handler step in to clear the weapon, nobody takes their safety gear off. Nobody moves. Everybody freezes until that weapon is declared safe and clear, and then people can start moving around the set. But up until then, the set is controlled by the armorer and the director and the first AD. Nobody else actually can move, can walk into that zone other than the film and crew that are engaged in that shot.
Brian, anything to add for the training of actors on your side of things?
No, the good thing is, if anything came out of this tragedy, that is good. I think it's going to give actors a little bit more focus, and they're going to want to make sure that they're safe. And luckily, a lot of actors also like the training because they want to be good at as part of their performance.
Right.
If they need to know how to work a weapon, then they need to go talk to the armor. And they usually like that or want to do that. So that's a good thing.
So
yeah, I got to agree as well.
Sorry,
I'm already seeing now, since this happened in October, I'm already seeing a considerable amount more attention being paid to the training for the actors. So it's already started. So I think we're going to be, again, that much ahead of prior to that.
I was just going to ask that question. Actually, is in the production or the pre-production planning stage of a film, are we going to start seeing more care when there's gun sequences or a heavy firearm use type of a film? Are we going to start seeing more of that training being taken into account by the production and planning for the actors to come up earlier if they're coming up from the States, to come up earlier to actually go through the training? But yeah, I think you just answered that question for me, Tom. My next question is and you just kind of is this a little bit of a segue into that from that. How has this affected the other parts of the business in the industry, this incident for you, Tom?
Other parts,
things changed
other than related to the firearms on the sets.
No, just the whole procedure of getting firearms to the set now. I understand that it's not the way it was 6 months ago. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's completely changed, and I think I'd be pretty accurate at saying it's changed all over the world. Right now, I think that the industry, the people behind the productions are afraid are reluctant, and I think rightly so. And I think everybody's hanging back right now, not quite being sure of how they should proceed. So yeah, it has changed considerably. Now, I think that the outcome of it is going to be like what we're talking about today is, you know, a little bit more detail paid to, the way things are going to work on the show. Again, the actor training and just the overall reassurance to everybody. And I mean, that goes, right from the executives at the networks to the attorneys that run, a lot of these shows for all the legal issues, down to the production managers, the props people, everybody, along the way. But yeah, at the moment, the industry, there's the action type shows that normally we'd be seeing right now are just kind of sort of being left behind. We're just not seeing it, and the are being used right now. They're just being used as a little bit of a reduced capacity. So I think there's still that heavy until what we're doing today. I'm hoping help.
Right. Dean, has it affected your work at all?
It goes to what Tom has said. And I just recently was doing some additional photography on a feature film where I had one vintage flintlock pistol. And, I always went through all my procedures and protocols, but this time I walked into the producer's tent, which I never normally do. Usually I brought it to set. I went to the first AD. Everything that I defined, but this time I walked up to the producers and said, I want you to look at this because I want you to know what we do. This is how we do it. And I wanted to put their mind at ease as well. And so, yeah, we're incredibly safe. We've done this for decades safely. I don't feel the need to change anything I've done prior to but what I've done now is I'm trying to educate more people on just all the steps we have in place. And so our job is to put the producer's mind at ease now as they're the ones that bear the responsibility for the overall production when it's in production.
Right. Brian, working as an AD, same old at this point, except for when it comes to firearms.
Yeah, I think so. I think Dean's kind of answered the question.
There's a very interesting question in the Q&A that just popped up from Emma, and I know Dean and I, actually Brian, Dean, and myself, we had this conversation on Thursday about the actor and the producer and the conflict of interest there, and I think Dean, you kind of summed it up really well, with Mr. Baldwin being the one that pulled or was in possession of the firearm when it went off.
Yeah, I of course can't remember anything I said the other day because now that I'm live, my brain is completely. But I think the point of the matter is this: Alec Baldwin, the actor, in my personal opinion, just my personal opinion, I don't blame for the firearm going off that day. From a liability standpoint, because my job as a prop master or the armor's job is to go through all those steps all the way to the set to hand the actor that firearm and show them that it's safe. The fact that he didn't look at the firearm when the first AD handed him the firearm, there can be something to be said for that. But I've never counted on the actor to tell me whether it's safe. My job was to show them that it was safe. But Alec Baldwin, the producer, whether he was directly involved in hiring, it'll all come out. If your name is attached to a production as a producer and you've hired other producers to work with that then hire inexperienced crew, and a tragedy happens, whether it's Sarah Jones on the train trestle in Georgia or the firearm incident on Rust, if your name is attached as a producer, then you've opened yourself up to litigation. And I think that a lot of actors have their names listed as producers because it helps them raise money for the smaller budget film without actually being involved in the day-to-day operations of that smaller film.
Yeah,
I don't
so
know if I answered that question, but.
Yeah, I think you make a good point towards the end that there are multiple levels of producing involved, right? Some are there strictly to raise money and don't have any interaction with the day-to-day activities or anything with the crew. So yeah, Emma, I hope that that answered your question. It's is there a conflict of interest? There could be, but it depends on what producing role that person has, I would think.
Yeah, I don't see it as a conflict of interest because most films have actors attached as whether it's a Brad Pitt film that I worked on or a Kevin Costner film. Their names are attached as a producer because they brought something to the table to help get that film financed. So once they switch into actor mode, that's a whole different world and a different mindset for them. They're in character and they're trying to remember their lines. And our job is to give them all the tools to be safe on the set.
Right.
It's our job. It's our job
It's
to make that safe.
Perfect. Anything else anybody wants to talk about before we talk about procedures of when an incident occurs? So I do want to speak to Paula's questions in the chat.
No, I'll just quickly, I noticed that on our general chat, there's a question there about just reading there about the 1 meter, and she Sarah here asks about the proximity rule that was being used by an armor in the United States. The proximity that we use as well. So when we set up an actor, there is always a proximity because depending on the you may have ejecting casings flying out, the type of load that's being used, so the kind of flash that's coming out the front of the gun. So every situation is unique, and when we do set up and block that actor that is going to be firing, we do take the proximity as well into consideration. There's safety aspects around the actor as well. So I just wanted to quickly make that, answer that.
Perfect. And thank you for that. And yeah, back to Emma's comment, do we not work to our highest responsibility? We all, yes, have a responsibility to meet an expectation, but I think the whole liability side of things or the highest responsibility really depends on what you bring to the table, as Dean said. And some people, performers, they want to lend their name or they want the producing credit to bring money into the production to help finance the production, and that's just it. They're not involved in the line producing or the daily operations of the production, and so maybe they have a responsibility to ask these questions. But generally, yeah, as Dean put it, they're performers. Their first responsibility is to perform. So it's a good question, and I don't know if it's one that we can answer within the four of us on the screen right now. But I hope that gives you.
I do want to say one thing. It's everybody's responsibility for safety on set, regardless of what your job is. I mean, I agree with what Dean's saying about the actors in their head, but it's everybody's responsibility. So if you see something that's unsafe, you need to speak up and mention it. It's not just the first AD's job to be the last word. I think it's everybody's responsibility. We're all responsible to get home safely and make sure that everybody gets home safely and sees their families and stuff. And I'm selfish because I want to make sure everybody's safe. I'm not here to not get sued or I want everybody to be safe. And that's just the way I kind of always have dealt with it.
I agree with Brian on that note. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us don't go, oh, look how big that flame is coming out of that barrel. We're so excited about all this noise we're making. At the end of the day, we want everybody to be able to get in their cars and go home safe. I think those of us who've been in the industry a long time have a great deal of responsibility now to the young film workers that have been brought into this vastly expanding industry in the last 10 years to impart all the knowledge we can to help them succeed. The two people that were charged with the firearms on set of Rust had very little experience, so they had no ability to push back to bullies. And a first AD can be a bully. Some of the biggest bullies I've worked with early in my career were the first AD or the line producer. And if you don't have that wealth of experience to be able to push back, or you don't have the knowledge to push back, then you do get yourself into some really tough situations. And at the end of the day, we're feeding a remote control on a coffee table. We're just trying to entertain people. And that's the most important thing to always keep in mind. Yeah, there's pressure to make your day. There's budget pressure. There's all that stuff. But at the end of the day, nothing is worth sacrificing safety for a shot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree absolutely 100%. And just to go back for a little bit, as far as it is everybody's responsibility to be as safe as possible on a set, to keep their eyes open, to see what's going on. And, from our training point of view, and going back to training the actors, if I can train an actor, and one of the first things I show him how to do is, how the gun is proofed to make sure that it is what he's being told it is. So, if I'm going to be showing him a gun, and the gun, say, during his training, I've how that gun is to be looked at. And it's not necessarily just for that show. Hopefully it sticks with that person so that, a year, 2, 3, 5 years later, when they're on a show in Romania or wherever, and they're handed that gun, they'll go, oh, during my training, this is what I learned to do. Regardless of what that guy just told me. Maybe I don't understand the language and he's saying it's safe, but you get, so that goes back again to, doing the training and good communication and letting everybody know about that type of training.
Right. Perfect. Just an interesting question popped into my brain. And I guess all three can answer this one, and I'll go around the room. Have you ever had a situation on set where you can't find a firearm that was brought to set? If you know what I mean. Dean?
I smiled because we all had those moments of panic, but for me, it's more about, and this goes to ADing, it has nothing to do with not finding that firearm in my possession and on my truck. But what happens when we're doing a show is we break for lunch. And a lot of times I will let the performers keep their gun leather if I'm doing a Western or if I'm doing Passchendaele, World War I. But I always make them turn in their replicas or their firearms at lunch, even though we're on location, we're away from everywhere. And I do a count. And many times I've had to go to the extras tent to go, okay, I'm short 2 weapons, to then wander out to the battlefield after 20 minutes to find 2 people sleeping in some place they found to hide from the world with my rifles. And so in the whole procedure of how our days go, and it goes to our planning, is we have to be consistent in our message when a background come to set, if you're issuing them a replica or a real firearm, that they turn everything in at lunch when they get broken from the battlefield. I'm talking battlefield specific in that regard. So yeah, there's that moment of, okay, we're short 2 rifles, or we're short 2 replica Glocks, or we're short, and then you go trying to find the person that you gave them to. And that's the frustrating factor that can happen sometimes.
Yeah. I asked this question because I was on a production that I was on very early as a production assistant. It was a SWAT scene, right? And during a break, lunch, I think it was, exactly what you said. They couldn't account for one of the handguns, and it just so happened that the background performer had decided, well, I want to go to Starbucks, still in costume, with the sidearm strapped to him. And it did cause quite a bit of panic over lunch for that. So that's why it popped into my brain, right?
And just so you know, I fire people. It's the only time a prop master can fire people, because I just say, you're not give me that stuff. You're not getting it back. And sometimes the production goes, we can't fire. And the continuity in the next scene, I go find someone else to put in the uniform because they're not getting anything from me. If they disrespect that prop, they're not getting it, another one.
Yeah. Brian, Tom, any input on that one?
Yeah, I mean, the checks and balances, the terms and conditions of the licensing in Canada is priority number one. It has to be accounted for right away, and so yeah, it's very, very heavily controlled on a set.
Right. Brian? Yeah.
I think everybody needs to just treat weapons a little bit differently than other props, like whatever, a notebook or anything else, or a pencil, because I think just in the end, I think we just all have to. Even a rubber gun can cause panic if you walking down the street because somebody has a rubber gun on their hip, and in Canada especially, we don't know that. So when we have open guns, we're actually bringing the RCMP often, or police, Vancouver Police, just so that sometimes people just see a person even off from the set with a gun and they call 911, which is what they should do. And so they're fielding these calls. We just got to make sure, even when they're not actively doing a scene, I think we just need to treat the weapons with the respect that they deserve, because they're weapons. Even the look of we don't want to cause a panic when somebody sees somebody walking around with a rifle. It's unusual and scary, especially this day and age.
So is there a certain level of complacency, or do we run the risk of complacency and underestimating the risk of firearms, which is a question in the Q&A as well? So do we underestimate the risk of bringing firearms to set? Have we become complacent? Well, I guess prior to Rust, have we become complacent?
Not on my set, and not on any sets I've been on in British Columbia. No, it's always been consistent. We've been consistent. I've been consistent for 37 years. Tom has been consistent in all the time I've known him. I've known Brian for 35 years, 36 years. The consistency is always the same. There is no complacency. It goes to exactly what Brian just said. So if it looks like a gun, you treat it like it is a real firearm. You don't. There's no distinction from the public as to whether somebody's walking into Starbucks packing a Glock.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. There should never be complacency at all. It's always been done one way, and it's going to always be that way. I just a very quick little insert about this. A couple of weeks ago, we got a phone call from an attorney for a major studio. And the question was about, the firearms that are going to be used in the show. And their comment was, well, everything's going to be different now. It's not the same anymore. Rust. And what we basically had to answer was, well, for them, probably, there's going to be no difference. There never has been. There's only ever been one way of doing it correctly, safely, proficiently, and that can't be changed. Regardless of technology, it can only be done correctly one way.
Right. What about the smaller, lower budget productions?
Well, that's what we're all hoping for, is that, I can't speak for other film locations. When you come here to British Columbia, we're hoping that with, the various training programs like your Actsafe program and, the type of community we have here in the film industry, that even though low budget independent films are going to be treating it exactly the same. There should be no difference between a very low budget show or a huge budget blockbuster. The procedures have to be the same. And so,
and you need it. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. If you're somebody who is going to be bringing in a low budget show into town and you want to cut corners, you really shouldn't be doing it.
And just to build off of that, if you are interested in the Actsafe firearms course, instructed by not necessarily Tom, but one of Tom's many capable armorers. I think we have Rick coming up next. Either is it? I'm not too sure who's on the schedule.
Yeah, we have a few. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have them weekly starting in March when we reopen the office. March 9th, 16, 23, and 27 are what is technically on the schedule. You can subscribe or sign up at Actsafe /courses certifications for those courses if you're interested in that. They fill up quickly. We are kind of getting towards the end of our session with a lot of a great conversation with this one. There is the one thing that came up in the Q&A that I said I was going to. My mouse is now not working, which is unfortunate. What's going on? That I can't scroll down to the question now. Great. Okay, mouse is dead. But it was procedure after incident occurs type of thing, and it's handled the same way on with a gun fatality or a firearms fatality or any other accident incident that results in a fatality on set. Yeah, the production generally does stop for an amount of time, depending on the severity, or not the severity, but the depth of the investigation. So I don't know if it would ever be suspended or cut off completely. Obviously, on rest, it does. I don't think that would be coming back. But on Deadpool, there was a fatality on that production, and after an amount of time, it did restart and complete filming. So it really depends on the situation. But generally, yeah, you will see a stop in production, because what will happen is usually the RCMP will show up to secure the scene. WorkSafe BC will show up. There will be the requirement for an investigation, and there might be certain things that come out of an immediate investigation or the preliminary investigation that has to be fulfilled before the production can start up again. So that's generally a Cole's Notes version of what would happen. So I hope that answers your question, and my mouse is back. Anything else? Closing thoughts? So we got 5 minutes left.
I'll just say that, here in British Columbia, we've got a safe industry. We've got a good community of people. It's an exciting industry for a lot of people, and it's very safe. And hopefully we can continue on and have the industry continue for everybody else for the next generations.
Agreed. Dean, Brian?
I'll let Brian go first, I guess, and then I'll think of something to say.
I think just to reiterate, it's getting home to your family at the end of the day, and I think that's what basically Actsafe is all about. Just and especially this, just you can, even if you have this inkling that something's not right, and just some people, I say in my safety meetings, some people have different skills outside of the world that they can bring to the set. So some people are rock climbers, and they go, well, that rope's not tied properly. They just mention it to the grips and say, hey, that rope's not tied properly, because I know about ropes, because I'm a climber. And even though if you're brand new to the film industry, don't be afraid to speak up. I mean, sometimes it's fine, and we can talk about it and discuss it, and it's not a safety concern, but I think it's best to just mention it, speak up. I hope the days of the bully first ADs are over. I'm not one, I don't think.
No.
But I'm there's no mistake that I'm in charge when I'm on set. So I'm not a bully, but I'm in charge on set. So if you come to me with a safety, I always stop and discuss every safety thing, no matter how small or insignificant it is. You may think it is, just bring it up, because it's better to say it than not. Let's go home to our families at the end of the night.
I concur with what Brian says. I think at the end of the day, everybody deserves a right to go home safely, and they have to understand that production, the first AD, Tom, myself, our representatives across our departments in the industry have taken all steps to keep everybody safe and able to go home at night. And I think that we need to draw on the knowledge of the industry now, more so of the people who've been around for decades, to try and get them to impart the knowledge they have to the next generation. We love this industry. The reason we've stayed here this long is not because we get the good health benefits out of it from the long hours and the fratter days and all that stuff. We have a passion for it. We have a love for it. And even though the incident happened in New Mexico, it happened to all of us, any of us who work in the industry, just like when Sarah Jones was killed in Georgia. If an accident on a set happens anywhere, it happens to all of us, because our industry, although large, is still small, and it's still a small town. We all know people who work on various sets. I know 2 people who from the Rust set. So it's the film industry is a big small town. That's how I like to say it is. And quickly, the great thing about our industry is quickly, even though we're in British Columbia, Tom was talking to all his my counterparts around the world. And I remember a prop master from Los Angeles called me. He goes, I replayed every gunshot I've ever done in my entire career as I laid in bed last night. And I said, so did I. And we all, for days, didn't sleep well. We all played it over and over again in our minds as to everything we've done to keep the crew safe. And I think going forward, just like when something good will come of it, but this time it hurts more because it didn't need to happen. We've already put all these great safeguards in place, and we set such a high benchmark, especially here in Western Canada. And so when it happened, it really hit us all, and it turned all our radars back up to full. Not that it wasn't on full before, but as one of the questions said, is there a complacency? There was never a complacency. Maybe because we've done it so well for so long, we're in automatic. But now we're back to full on.
Okay. Tom, I know you already had some final parting words, but anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with Dean 100%. We've been doing it for such a long time. It's second nature to us. And since this incident, it's made everybody sort of rethink and bring it to the sort of forefront of your mind again. Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay, and last parting words. Sarah, I'm sorry we're not going to be able to tackle that particular question today, but I apologize. Maybe we can meet up in the lounge somewhere and we can have a discussion about that. Mimi brought out a great endorsement of the Actsafe course and asked about level 2. We are in discussions right now, and it's just a scheduling thing at this point with Tom to try and figure out how to update and enhance the current course. And Tom's a very, very busy person, so but it is in the books. Maybe not necessarily level 2, but we'll see. Maybe there is level 2. Maybe we can figure out something for that. I would love to thank my panelists today, Dean Godin, Tom Falcan, and Brian Knight. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning on a Saturday. Hopefully none of you had to work the Friday. But yeah, thank you for being here so early. Well, actually, it's not early for you guys. It's early for me. It's Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. What? Thanks for being here. Thank you, UBCP ACTRA and Levitt Machinery for sponsoring this session. It is coming up on 10:30. Time for a stretch break. And our stretch break today is sponsored by Set Protect. Please check them out in the sponsor lounge. In 30 minutes, we have a whole slew of fun stuff for you. If my mouse starts working again, you can join Mona Shum in the motion picture stream. Walk It Out, locations, walkthrough, identification of hazards and building materials. So that's a beautiful segue into another session that I'm doing after lunch. Musicians rise above the workplace injury in the performing arts stream. Watch and listen to Jack Thomas. This will be a rather inspiring session. You don't have to go to either one of those two if you don't want to. You can come and watch me. At 11 o'clock, I'll be doing Joint Health and Safety Committee for Filmies. What you need to know, the very basics on Joint Health and Safety Committees as it applies to motion picture production. Thank you again, everybody on the panel. And we'll see you in half an hour.